You're listening to the Emotional Abuse Recovery Podcast, episode number 82. Today, we are going to be digging into rumination. Rumination really can take up a lot of space in your mind. And when you're spending all of that time focusing on things of the past, how things should have been, worries about the future, anxieties about what could happen, what really is happening is you're losing out on the present moment. And one thing that myself, as a survivor and thriver of emotional abuse, wanted more of was joy, and I couldn't figure out how to get it. And part of the reason, a big part of the reason, was because I didn't have any room for it. There was so much other stuff in the way. So today, I'm going to be breaking this down for you and giving you some actionable steps and things that you can do to start to make more space for that joy. You deserve it. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Emotional Abuse Recovery Podcast, a podcast specifically designed to help you heal after a toxic or narcissistic relationship. This podcast teaches you to use your subconscious mind to go from feeling stuck to set free. In here, you will learn how to use the power of your own mind to free yourself from emotional pain, move forward with confidence, and experience the inner peace you deserve in your healing journey after emotional abuse. I'm your host and subconscious reprogramming coach, Allison Dagny. So let's get started. Okay, so let's just dive into this concept of rumination. If you're not familiar with rumination, it's one of those things that I really specialize in because of its impact on survivors of emotional and narcissistic abuse. And rumination is basically just a thought habit, okay? So when you think of something over and over again in your mind, right? That is actually creating a thought habit that becomes automatic. So if you're thinking of something, your brain thinks it's important, and so it steps up for you to try to make your life easier. If it's something that you're thinking about so many times, the brain says, well, this needs to be put on autopilot because your brain's focus is to alleviate tasks, that you don't need to focus on. So if it's important, it's going to make it automatic for you. It's the same way like if you're learning how to drive a car, right? In the beginning, you've got all these things to worry about. You've got to look at signs. You've got to pay attention to the traffic. You have to, make sure that you're staying in the lanes and using your wipers and your turn signals. And there's so many things that you have to think about. So if you can remember back when you first got your license and you were driving, you probably didn't pay attention to the signs as much, or you didn't really see a cat run across the road because you're so focused on just making sure you don't wreck. Well, when eventually you become really, really good at driving, you can get from point A to point B and have no idea how you even got there and not recall a whole lot about it at all. That's because your brain saw this repetitive action that you were doing. It became an automatic for you to make life easier. So that's essentially how rumination works in your brain when it comes to thought habits and things that you're thinking about. And ruminating is typically very painful for most people, especially survivors of abuse, because you're focused on the things that have hurt you. You may be questioning things. You might be swirling what ifs in your mind. And when this occurs, it has a very negative impact because you are not able to be present. You are not able to focus as easily. You might have trouble falling asleep, right? So there's many, many impacts that this can have, and they're mostly not good. So that's what I want to help you with, because as we can start to shift this, then we make space for more joy. And I'm having a 3-day live event on Zoom tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you haven't registered for this, please visit the link in the show notes here or go out to my website and get your free spot, because I'm going to specifically address this on how we can start to get to the source, stop the rumination about the ex, about the pain of the abuse, while incorporating a lot of joy, right? So once we start to weaken all that negative ruminating, then what happens is we allow for more space for things that we really want. Being present with our kids and the people who we really truly care about, being able to enjoy our life, being able to focus on a book before we go to bed instead of thinking about all the horrible things that happened, right? So I want this to be helpful to you if you're struggling with this. And chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you might be experiencing it now, or definitely have in the past, or it could be coming up for you right now in this very moment. So let's first talk about this thought habit, and then we will get into more details about how we can make these changes for ourselves. So I'd love for you for a moment to just imagine that you're carrying a backpack and it's filled with all this unfinished business, unresolved emotions, thinkings, thoughts, what ifs, should have beens, could have beens, all of that, right? This backpack represents the weight of rumination, right? And it's filled with all these thoughts about your past and what happened and regrets and fears even about the future. Well, in this backpack, there's a folder labeled Unfinished Conversations. And every time you replay a scenario in your mind, wondering, maybe I could have said something differently, maybe I could have done this differently, maybe it would have turned out differently, you're adding another document to this folder. Paper can become very heavy, right? If you've ever lifted a box of paper, it's really heavy. The weight increases with every replay, with every thought that you think about this. It's pulling you away from the lightness in the present moment. So now let's add a few rocks to this backpack, right? And these rocks are going to represent worry about the future. The rocks are heavy. They're not pebbles. They're rocks. Like hold in your hand a rock. It's burdensome. It is symbolizing the fear of the unknown, the anxiety about what lies ahead that you can't know, and the anticipation of possible pain. So as you're carrying your backpack around, right, it's got all these papers in it, it's got all these rocks in it, carrying it around throughout your day, the weight becomes more than just physical. It also becomes emotional, because you might find it challenging to stand up tall because you're pulled down. You might find it hard to fully engage with the people around you because it's such a heavy burden. It could also be really tough to appreciate the beauty in the present moment because you're so focused on that pull on your shoulders, that heaviness dragging you down, and what's in there that needs to be looked at that you don't even really want to look at, but that your brain keeps thinking about over and over and over again. So the thoughts in that folder and the weight of the rocks are occupying your mental space, which then leaves very little room for joy. So this metaphorical backpack, right, it's filled with all of these remnants of rumination. It's preventing you from dancing freely in the sunshine and smelling the flowers along the way, or fully embracing the warmth of anything that comes your way that's positive, right? Because how much harder is it to enjoy your life and your journey when you're being just yanked down by the heavy weight that's on your back? So on the journey to break free from this rumination, it's not about throwing away the backpack, taking it off, and just setting it down, right? Because that's not really that realistic. You've committed to the backpack at this point and you've got all this stuff in there. It's about unpacking it, addressing each item, each file, each rock. and letting go of that unnecessary weight. So as you end up slowly lightening the load, what you're also doing is creating space for joy. And this allows you to walk more lightly, to move more freely, to dance, or to savor the moments that you're experiencing, whereas you otherwise wouldn't have been able to. So by understanding the impact of rumination on your present happiness, joy, peace, contentment, you can start to process unpacking it and making really intentional choices to experience joy in the here and now, the present moment. Now, another metaphor that I like to use, I love analogies and metaphors, is a garden. And I've used this one before if you've heard my podcast, but how, having positive thoughts about yourself or things that you really want to be focusing on instead of the things that are causing you pain is like giving your garden water and sunlight and fertilizer, right? While rumination, on the other hand, is like neglecting those aspects and just allowing the weeds to take over. And you might be thinking, well, I don't know how to not let the weeds take over. They're just there and they're just growing, and I can't just get into my brain and start like taking the weeds out, right? I get it. But there is a way, there is a tool. I'm going to be talking to you about how to do that. And in my 3-day Thriver event, we're going to go through that as well. But here's how you can actually start to shift the thinking, right? Because as I said before, it's a thought habit. So when you think about something enough times, it becomes automatic. And the only reason that you're continually ruminating is because you've had these thought patterns in your brain for so long that your brain decided it was important to put on autopilot for you, which for most people is like, thanks a lot, but no thanks, right? So let's talk about shifting the thought patterns, right? One of the really good ways to shift your thought patterns is to try to be present. Right? And a lot of people say, I don't know how to do that. I can't be present. Like my brain is just not going to turn off. It's just going 500 miles a minute. I would really challenge you to challenge yourself here. And what I mean by this and being present can literally be as simple as 1 minute. It can be 1 minute, right? Because we're just taking baby steps here. We don't have to like pop in a, theta waves brain meditation for an hour. No, to try to be present. Absolutely not. That's like trying to, teach someone to swim and just throw them off the diving board in the deep end. That's really not going to help. Let's start small and dip our toes in the water. And that's all you have to do is start with 1 minute. So my challenge to you is to sit in a quiet space where you're not going to be interrupted for 1 minute. Okay? You can put music in your ears if you want for that 1 minute, or you can just close your eyes and just try to concentrate. But here's the thing. The goal isn't to not think, right? Because if I tell you, oh, don't think about a green monkey, you're going to think about a green monkey, right? Because your brain just heard that and it's going to be, how do I not think about that? So instead of trying not to think or trying to push the thoughts away, the ruminating things that are going through your mind, instead of like trying to push them away because that doesn't work, is to focus on something else. Okay, so the goal is to stay present for 1 minute, and what you can focus on is your body. Focus on your toes, then your feet, then your ankles, your calf muscles, your knees, your upper thighs, your hips, your stomach. You can even, when you start getting up to your heart space, you can actually like pay attention and feel your heart beating. You can pay attention to your breath when you're breathing. You can pay attention to the little tinglies in your toes and fingers. This is amazing stuff, right? And it only takes a minute. But all you're doing is just teaching your brain how to be present, right? You're teaching it how to focus on what's actually happening now. There might be a time or two when you're doing this and your brain starts to go in a different direction, starts to think about something, and especially if you've been ruminating for a long time, that probably can happen, right? But that's okay. Don't beat yourself up. Don't judge yourself. Just pull back to some part of your body. What part of my body am I focusing on? Am I focusing on my hands, my feet, my knees, my neck, right? My head? What area of my body am I actually focusing on? Like if I close my eyes, I have my eyes closed right now. I have my eyes closed. I can actually feel my eyes moving around inside of underneath my eyelids, right? You can focus on that. Anything that you can put your attention on in that present moment is going to help you be very mindful in that moment. And again, you could set a timer for 1 minute if you want to try it for 1 minute. If it does work, oftentimes you'll start to be more relaxed, and then you'll be extending your time beyond that 1 minute. And then it'll be 2, and then it'll be 3. This takes practice. This isn't something, that's why I'm saying start with 1 instead of, oh, I'm going to try to be present for 10 minutes straight, right? Especially if you've never done this kind of thing before. But it's not trying to push the thoughts away. It's trying to focus on something in the present moment that your brain can really latch onto. So that's my first tip with this, because like I said, you're not just going to open up your brain and yank the weeds out. This is a process and it takes practice. The other thing that you can do here is to really try to replace the negative thinking with something more positive or at least neutral. Okay, so what I mean by this is when you catch yourself in the moment, like let's say, for instance, you're driving and you're on autopilot right in your brain, because that happens a lot. Once the brain is comfortable with the activity that it's doing, like taking a shower or riding a bike or driving along the road, all of those things can become like automatic. Well, what then will start to happen is you'll start thinking. Your brain will start to wander, and it'll start probably bringing in more ruminating, which is not really ideal. So if you find that this is a pattern for you and like, oh my gosh, yes, every time I'm driving home from work, I'm thinking and I'm ruminating, right? You can distract yourself. You can turn on the radio. You can do things like that. But I would encourage you not to do that. I would encourage you to start to pay attention to when you ruminate, when it happens the most often for you, right? If you're at work and you're focusing on things, it's not happening. If you're doing it right before bed, if you're doing it as soon as you wake up in the morning, while you're driving, when you're showering, like when is it happening most? Pay attention to that. And when that happens, catch it. Catch the thought in the moment. You've really got to be aware. This is a big self-awareness activity. Be aware of when that thought pops in your head. The very first time you experience that thought, right? Let's say that the thought is about your ex, and maybe the thinking is things should have been different, right? Man, and you're running through all the things like, if only this had happened, and if only that had happened, and things could have been so different, and things should have been so different, right? That's where you stop yourself and you say, wait, there it is. That's my ruminating thought popping in. I'm going to pay attention to this. Okay? Now, when I mean pay attention to it, I don't mean we're like focusing on it, right? We're just pulling it out from our mind so that it doesn't run away like a runaway train down the tracks, right? We're saying, oh no, pump the brakes. Hold on. It's here and I'm recognizing it. Now, the next thing you want to do is not judge yourself. This is normal. This is a brain habit activity. It's no different than learning to ride a bike or driving, except for it's a brain habit, right? If you think of a time when you were really, really in love and you couldn't stop thinking about that person, right? It's not because you just in love so deeply. It's because you created a thought habit. It's because you were thinking about them and thinking about them and thinking about them. And then your brain's like, you're not going to stop thinking about them because you said this was important, so I'm putting it on autopilot for you. It's brain science. That's what I need to make sure I'm being very clear here. This is about your brain, okay? So when you catch that thought in the moment, the ruminating thought, the painful thought, that's where you can just pay attention to it What is it? What are you thinking about? What is going through your mind? And if you're in a place where you can write it down, then write it down. Like if you're driving, obviously you can't write it down, but maybe you can just at least stop it. You can catch it in the moment and then just be curious about it. Ask questions to yourself. Think to yourself, why do I think things should have been differently? Why do I think it could have worked out? What is going through my mind? Like actually start to become like a scientist and break it down. Start investigating those thoughts, right? If you can write it down, then you're at least capturing it on paper and you can come back to it at a later time. But like I said, sometimes when we're on autopilot, like driving or in the shower, we might not be able to write it down in that moment, but you can do it afterwards. Like if you get to your destination, you can be like, okay, here's my piece of paper. I'm just going to jot this down. Or after you get out of the shower, I'm going to write it out so that I have it to come back to. And when you have it on paper, then you can actually start to dig a little bit further. You can ask yourself more introspective questions and unpack it. Unpack that backpack, right? It's not just going to be like, take it out and throw it away. It's not going to happen that way. We're unpacking it and we have to look at it. And we have to see, what is this? Why does this keep coming up for me? What am I believing? Is this true for everybody? Could other people see this differently than me? Why do I want to hold on to this? What am I getting from holding on to this? Is there some benefit to me? And some people immediately shake their head and say, no, there's no benefit to ruminating. But I'm here to tell you, your brain ruminates on things, doesn't want to let go of things, resists change because it's uncomfortable. It feels good to hold on to it for a certain reason. It's the same reason why if someone smokes cigarettes, they don't choose to smoke cigarettes because they want to harm themselves, right? Even though most people would agree that smoking cigarettes is harmful. But that's not why they're doing it. They're doing it because they get something from it. It feels good, and it's no different from your brain and how you ruminate. So asking those deep introspective questions is going to help you unpack all the stuff in that file and let go of all those rocks so that you can actually be present and you can have fun and experience joy. And, you could be in the same room as someone and not be present at all, right? Somebody could have a conversation with you back and forth, right? You're nodding, yeah, and you haven't heard a word they said. And they think you're present and you're not because your brain is somewhere else. It's thinking about things that really aren't important, right? So this is how you begin to start to shift this, right? It's about getting to the source, which is your subconscious mind. Runs 95% of the show. You can't just push these things away. You can't just distract yourself because guess what? When there's no more distraction, you're right back to ruminating, right? If you go to work and you're really busy all day, chances are you're probably not ruminating a whole bunch, right? Because you got work to do and responsibilities and this and that and the other. It's when you get home, you kick your feet up, you sit in bed, you get a bath or whatever, and all of a sudden, insert rumination because there's no distraction anymore, right? So you can't constantly distract yourself. That is a process of the conscious brain, and that will not get you lasting results. It's reprogramming and rewiring what's going on in the subconscious level in order to make it a new automatic. All right, so another thing I want to talk about here that can help tremendously is, I guess it would be like if you had a jar and you want to fill up that jar with joy and love and peace and goodness and all the things that you'd rather be feeling than the negative things, right? So your jar or the joy jar in your brain is sort of lacking right now because it's filled up with all the rumination and there's no room for all that stuff. So while you're trying to shift out of rumination, you can also seek out and focus on things that actually bring you joy, that are actually bringing happiness to your life, right? So there's a part of your brain called the reticular activating system. I've talked about this before on the podcast, but if this is the first time you're hearing it, I would definitely encourage you to go on YouTube and look up the reticular activating system and watch some of the videos that are out there, because basically this part of your brain, it's at the base of your brainstem, is there to filter out things that are not important, right? Because we are being inundated by billions of bits of information all the time, every day, all day long, right? And we don't need to be able to process all of that information, right? We don't need to know that the dog is barking and that the air conditioning kicked on and that our toe is cold or there's a tingle in our ear and that somebody's clinking dishes. Like, we don't need to know that. Like, we're focusing on what we're focusing on in that moment, and everything else is still a visual or auditory or like a sensory type of message that's coming in, right? That the light's on, that the air smells weird, whatever it is, right? All that stuff is coming in, but we're not like in active processing mode. It's happening inside of our brains, but the reticular activating system is filtering that out. It's saying this is not that important right now. We don't need to focus on that, right? So if you are always focusing on things that is keeping you in pain or causing you to ruminate, then your reticular activating system is going to basically push away all the other things. It's going to filter out the goodness. It's going to filter out the joy. It's going to filter out the other things. Its focus is on what you say is important, right? It doesn't know what's important. You tell it what's important. So if your children are running around giggling and having fun, that needs to go in your joy jar, right? That needs to go in there. You need to pay attention to that and focus on that, because then your reticular activating system goes, oh, joy is here. We have fun. There is laughter. Things are good, right? And then it wants to find more of that. It's the same thing as if you are looking to buy a red sports car. You've been looking online, you've been looking in magazines, you've been talking to people about it, and now you drive around and you're like, oh, there's that car. Oh my gosh, I never realized how many of these cars are actually in my area. Because your brain now has seen it, and now it's seeing more of it, right? And it's the same thing with this joy jar. The more you put into it, the more you show it that, wait, there are lots of opportunities for this here. It's happening all around me. Then that part of your brain pipes up. So it says, all right, we're going to see more of this. Now things are seeming funnier. Now it's, oh, wait, that was actually really fun. I was actually able to have a good time, right? So all of these things work kind of in combination together. You don't have to do them all at the same time, but because you are listening here, because you want to experience more joy, because you want to stop these ruminating thoughts, start somewhere, right? Do the 1 minute exercise. Start focusing more on the things that bring you joy. Start catching your ruminating thoughts when you're on autopilot and write them down, right? And start questioning and being introspective. You don't have to do it all, but you got to start somewhere. You got to start somewhere. Okay, so there's one more thing here that can be extremely helpful to help you stop this rumination and get it under control, right? And the work I do in my program is we have a 4-step tool that helps you do this. Obviously, I can't teach it on the podcast, but that's what I help people do, is actually have a tool that they use in combination with activities and things like this as well. So here's the other really important thing that you can do when you're trying to make space for more joy is, and like get rid of that rumination, is to really find a connection between joy and gratitude. Okay, so what I mean by this is when you insert emotion, like positive emotion, into what you are thinking about, it helps the neural pathways in your brain take root, or maybe even just kind of shift. And emotion is really, really powerful. That's why when people have traumatic experiences that are really scary or really painful or harmful, that's why it lingers so long, because it's got the emotion attached to it. So when you are like, think about it in the opposite terms, right? If you want to experience goodness, bring in good emotion, right? So feeling let's say that it is your kids running around and being silly and like giggling and having fun, right? Or your nieces or nephews or whomever. You experience that joy in that moment, but add the emotion of gratitude. Gratitude is extremely powerful. It's a very high vibrational emotion. And if you can hold on to like, wow, I'm just so grateful that I have this. I'm so grateful that this is my life. I'm so grateful I can experience this in this moment. That will actually help your brain shift faster. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope these tips you can take with you and give them a try. I'd love to hear from you. My DMs are always open if you ever want to bring something like this to my attention or just like share an experience. I love hearing this stuff. Again, I want to remind you about my 3-day event that, I'm trying to really help you bring in more joy, to stop these thoughts, to really have fun. And I'm a silly person. Like, I don't know if you've been seeing any of my emails about this, but I have really funny emails that are coming out too, because I'm just like, I don't know, like, I think life should be fun. I think life should be joyful. And, I experience a lot of emotional pain and sadness and bad emotions for a really, really significant portion of my life. And I just was like, done. Like, I'm done with this. I'm not doing this anymore. So I like having fun. I want you to be able to have fun. I think if we can learn how to do this in the most efficient and fastest way possible to get rid of these ruminating thoughts and make space for more joy, that just creates an amazing ripple effect for the world, for everyone that you're around. All of the friends and family and children in your life, the people you work with, right? It radiates from you. You bring up that joy and it impacts everyone, not just you. So I'd love for you to join me and have some fun and learn some things. I am giving away prizes. I'm giving away 10 spots in my self-worth online program. And I'm also giving away 3 audible versions of my book, When Tears Leave Scars. And I also have some bonuses and things that I'm going to be offering as well. So if you want to come, you get a free spot. No questions asked. And you can register from the link in my bio, or you can reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook and I can send it to you there. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you'll take this episode and put some of these things into practice for yourself to help you along your journey. And if I can support you along the way, I would love to do that for you. And I'm always here if you ever have any questions or you need additional support. So I'll talk to you hopefully tomorrow at the Shift Happens Thriver session on the 24th at 7 p.m. If not, then I'll see you next week. Thank you for being here with me today in the Emotional Abuse Recovery Podcast. I hope you found value here with me. If this podcast episode was helpful to you, I'd love for you to hit subscribe and leave me a review. My goal is to help you go from feeling stuck to set free. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and you can check out whentearsleavescars.com for more resources and information to help you with your own emotional abuse recovery. Until next time, here's to believing in